This is Middletown II, The Mean Streets Just Got Meaner. Written by Eric A. Shelman. Narrated by the author. We would greatly appreciate it if you would hit the subscribe button before listening to this audiobook. That way you'll know what's coming next. Thank you so much. Enjoy the story. Middletown Apocalypse 2, The Mean Streets Just Got Meaner. By Eric A. Shelman. Narrated by the author. Chapter 1. From the 77th floor of the gleaming mirrored high-rise on West 50th Street, Marcus Frank stared down at the New York City streets below. It was just before lunch, and the sidewalks, boulevards, and avenues were bustling with pedestrians and cars. The horns were oddly silent. While Marcus knew it was only due to the fines being issued by law enforcement for drivers blaring the devices out of nothing more than impatience, it still disconcerted him. He had always liked the noise of the city. It calmed him and allowed him to immerse himself in the cacophony of other people's lives and put aside the burdens on his own shoulders. The sun warmed his face through the thick glass, and he tried to recall the last time he had been down there among the masses, fighting for taxis and crossing against traffic signals, eating questionable burritos from street vendors' carts, while pounding the pavement for XN Pharmaceuticals. He had been a sales rep back then, pushing XN's miracle drugs to every hospital and clinic that would buy them. Sure, with his education, he was overqualified for the job at the time, but it had all paid off, hadn't it? 15 years had flown by fast. Marcus's eyes refocused, and he now saw his reflection staring back at him. He analyzed his own gaunt face with wonder. The dark bags beneath his eyes, despite the 2 plastic surgeries he'd had. The mouth, set in a thin line against a once strong jaw that was now framed by pale, loose skin that would require another procedure to tighten. The reflection of the television on the wall behind him caught his attention, particularly the bright red banner at the bottom. He turned away from the world and his reflection. "Increase volume," he said, and the sound of the television increased until he said, "Stop." The television was tuned to CNN, and they were reporting on a mass sickness that had hit a small burg in Indiana called Middletown. The video, obviously taken from a news helicopter, showed several crashed cars and people running mad through the streets. "What the fuck?" he began, but the expletive died on his lips when a knock came on his door. Marcus said, "Mute," and the television obeyed. He stepped over to his desk and said, "Come in." Victoria Davis eased the door open and stuck her head in with a timid smile. "Mark," she said, "you have visitors." He glanced at his watch. "I don't have any appointments, do I?" "No," said Victoria. "It's Ms. Alcala and Mr. Donahue." Marcus stared at her. Gloria Alcala was the president of the board of directors for XN. Jerry Donahue was the vice president. "Did they say what they want? You did say I didn't have any appointments, right?" Victoria shrugged. "That's correct. I asked them. They wouldn't say what they want, but they both look pretty grim." "That's not unusual," said Marcus. "Both of them have grim resting faces. The whole fucking board does." He looked back toward the window and the skyscrapers surrounding them. "Make him wait a few minutes and send him in, please." "Are you okay?" she asked. Her long red hair fell over her shoulders in shiny waves, and her green eyes stared at him with concern. She wore a form-fitting white dress that accentuated her curves, and she had done her nails with a red polish that he had told her he liked. That had been during their most recent stay in the penthouse suite at the Baccarat Hotel, the weekend before. "Tell him I'm on a call and I'll be with him in a moment," he said. "And yes, I'm fine. I'm just tired is all." "I'm worried about you," she said, closing the door behind her and stepping further into the office. "I hoped after XN88 went into clinical trials you'd be able to relax." Marcus laughed and shook his head. "I don't have high hopes for it," he said. "Breaks down too quickly if it's not temperature controlled. Damn good drug, but it's too hard to keep stable." "What happens if it's not kept cool?" asked Victoria. "Just becomes ineffective?" Marcus shook his head. "In its refrigerated state, the 2 primary chemicals combine with oxygen to create the new beneficial compound. In a warm state, they found the compounds meant to be inert, that were never meant to wed, begin to react with one another. They didn't say what happened, just that it's crucial that they're stored cold and shipped cold. That's standard protocol, so it's no big deal. We all know what happens when two incompatible things wed, don't we? She quipped with a wink and a smile. Anyway, millions of Alzheimer's patients around the world will benefit. You didn't get where you are today being a defeatist. She walked toward him and slipped her arms around his waist. The engineers will figure it out. You'll see. Well, we sent out the first trial doses a couple days ago, he said. Right on schedule, so they should have gotten there by today at least. Hopefully they had their patients on the calendar and they're receiving their first treatments as we speak. Victoria shrugged, and Marcus thought he saw something flash across her eyes. Then the board should be happy, she said. Everything all right? He asked, squeezing her shoulders. For a minute there, I'm fine, she interrupted, but the smile on her lips seemed to fade. He put his arms around her and leaned down to kiss her mouth. She met him with a warm, swirling tongue that could wash away his troubles even more efficiently than the bustle of the city. The hug concluded. He pulled away and said, Hell with it, Vic. Tell him to come in. Might as well get this over with, whatever it is. Straightening her skirt, Victoria gave Marcus a wink before pulling open the door. Marcus smiled and watched her glide through it as if on a sheet of air, the door closing behind her. He busied himself at the computer and waited for Alcala and Donahue to make their entrance. In her typical protective fashion, Victoria kept them outside another 5 minutes before showing them in. He knew the time had come when he saw her phone line light up briefly, then go out again. She had clearly just pretended to call him and get approval to bring them in. 2 light raps came on the door, and Victoria swept it open. The 2 board members came in, and Victoria smiled at him and closed the door behind them, mouthing, "Good luck," before disappearing. Pray tell what extraordinary circumstances resulted in a visit from not only the board president, but the vice president as well. "Hi, Mark," said Gloria Alcala. "I'm afraid it's quite serious." Gloria Alcala was a good-looking Hispanic woman, somewhere in her 60s. She had been educated in her native country of Spain. She was just a couple of inches shy of 6 feet tall, and had what was once jet-black hair, now streaked with gray, and cut to her shoulders. Over her sleek form she wore a lemon-yellow dress that fell a couple of inches above her knees, with bright red high heels on her feet. She had always been pleasant, but then again Marcus hadn't seen her facing anything quite serious before. Marcus motioned for her and Jerry to sit in the 2 chairs in front of his desk. Neither did. "You see what's going on in Middletown, Indiana?" asked Jerry. In contrast to Gloria, Jerry Donahue was disheveled and overweight. His comb-over was laughable, and the wire-rimmed glasses that sat on his nose always appeared to Marcus as though they had sunken into his face like a shoe sinks into mud. It looked as if the skin had begun to grow around them. I saw something about it, but I didn't have time to watch the news. "What does this have to do with us?" He said, "Unmute," and the television sound came back on. Both Alcala and Donahue turned to stare at the screen. As they did so, Jerry said, "It has to do with the XN-88. They never received it at the Middletown, Ohio trial facility. Seeing what's happened now in Middletown, Indiana, I don't think it can be a coincidence." "You're thinking our product was shipped there by mistake?" "There are reports that a FedEx driver was there right before he crashed somewhere in town. I thought we were supposed to use a private courier for trial deliveries," said Gloria. "Yeah, we are, but we use other commercial carriers occasionally. What's the problem?" Jerry leaned on the desk, sweat rolling from his chin to the gleaming surface. Marcus stared at the droplets splashing off the mahogany with disgust. "It's degraded," he said. "What other answer can there be?" "And what's happening to people?" asked Marcus. "Rashes? How bad is it?" "You tell us," said Gloria. "People are eating people in Middletown, Marcus. They're fucking attacking and eating one another, and it's spreading. The entire town is set to be isolated and blown off the map." Marcus felt all muscle tone in his body go flaccid. He dropped back against his chair and stared at the screen. The current shot was clearly taken from a helicopter or a drone, and it showed what appeared to be the university grounds. Bodies lay everywhere, and the people on their feet were moving erratically, staggering about as if they had no idea where to go. As Marcus watched, a woman, her head darting back and forth, tripped and fell over what appeared to be a low wall. 3 people ran toward her and fell onto her struggling body, their hands clawing at her clothing and their faces buried into any exposed flesh. "I have to get those other samples back," whispered Marcus. "My God, they never said this could happen." "What?" screamed Jerry. "They never said this shit could create fucking zombies?" "Come on, Jerry," shouted Marcus. "Are you insane? If anything, it's something affecting the nervous system. Maybe creating some temporary brain abnormality. Don't be an idiot. This isn't a goddamn TV show." "So how is it spreading?" asked Gloria. "And what temperature range was recommended for storage?" "Between 36 and 46 degrees Fahrenheit," said Marcus. "The shipping packaging was more than sufficient for the time en route to each location." "Well, apparently it wasn't," said Gloria. "I want to see all the test results for XN88 at temperatures above 46 degrees. We've got a board meeting in half an hour. Have 9 copies made and get them to us beforehand." Marcus nodded. "I want to sit in on the meeting." "Then make 10 copies and be there at 11 a.m. sharp," said Gloria. They left the room with a quick glance at the television. Neither looked back at Marcus. Outside in the reception area, Victoria quickly gathered her purse and sweater and hurried from the room. She pressed the elevator button on the wall panel and tapped her foot nervously as she awaited the car. She stared intently at the lights, showing the car was stopped on the 90th floor. "Tapping your feet won't make it come any faster," said Jim Crane, janitor for XN Pharmaceuticals' suite of offices. He wore his navy blue coveralls and red keds. "I banged on it, yelled on it, even pushed the stop button so it couldn't go nowhere while I was getting trash from these offices." Victoria smiled politely, but did not acknowledge him. She had something more pressing on her mind. Suddenly, an idea struck her. She looked up at him and expanded her smile. "Jim, do you have a lunch cooler, like a lunchbox?" His eyes widened. "I do. It's an igloo. It comes with those blue plastic what's-it you freeze and keeps my Sammys fresh all day. Why you ask?" She looked at him and gave him another smile. "I need your help. Would you mind letting me borrow it? I have something in the car that needs to be cool, and I'm afraid it's going to spoil." "How long you need it for?" he asked. He looked at the wristwatch on his arm. "Oh, hell, I eat in like half an hour. Can you wait till then?" She shook her head. "No, Jim. Won't your sandwiches keep for half an hour? I really need it now." He looked concerned. "I'd like my Sammys cold. Tell you what, how long you going to need it?" "Just half an hour. And guess what? I'll take your sandwiches and put them in Mr. Frank's refrigerator. Meet you back here at 12:30. He brightened, and a smile crossed his lips. "For a pretty girl like you, I'll do it." "You're a lifesaver, Jim," she said, reaching out to pat his dirt-stained sleeve. "I mean that." The elevator doors slid open, and they stepped in. "Down to the basement's where I keep my lunch. They got a TV down there I'll watch. Judge Judy's on at the right time for my lunch." She heard his voice droning on as the elevator dropped smoothly downward toward the basement. Thinking of the package in her glove compartment, she hoped it wasn't too hot already. Her father needed the benefits of what was inside. "This is mango slices," said Jim. "My wife Helen gives them to me. I ain't actually into fruit, so to be honest, I just throw them out when I get here." He looked up, his eyes wide. "Say, you want one?" "No, Jim, I don't, but please hurry." Victoria wanted to reach out, grab the cooler, dump its contents onto the floor, and run back to the elevator. Instead, she waited as patiently as she could until he withdrew the last item. He felt the sandwich. "Yeah, I think, you know what, I'm just going to munch them down now." "Good," said Victoria, grabbing the cooler. She looked inside and saw 2 of the blue ice containers, and snapped it closed again. "I'll bring this back to you before I leave for the day, okay?" "Don't forget, I won't have anywhere for my lunch tomorrow." She was already on her feet and walking away. "I won't," she called back over her shoulder. She made her way to her car, which was parked in the company lot half a block away. Opening the door of the red Chevy Malibu, she felt the heat pouring out from inside. She cursed to herself, leaning in to pop open the glove box. The white package was where she had left it. She dropped down into the passenger seat and reached inside to retrieve the box. Pivoting open the top of the small igloo Playmate, she placed the box inside. As she went to release the box, something pinched her fingertip. She jerked her hand from the box and saw a small bead of blood on her finger. Instinctively, she put it to her mouth to suck away the blood, but jerked her finger away from her mouth. Something had punctured her tongue, too. Did she have a little wire splinter or something? Maybe picked up from the building's basement? She rubbed the tip of her tongue against the roof of her mouth as she stared at her finger. There was a vein or something just under the skin, next to the puncture. Dark, black. She went to analyze it, but it seemed to shrink suddenly, then disappear. Realizing the cooler was still open, she slid it closed. Sitting there for just a moment longer, Victoria checked her iPhone for the time and knew she had to leave now. If there was any chance the trial drug might decompose, her father needed to have the injections before that happened. She pulled the passenger side door closed and threaded her legs into the driver's side, lifted herself over the center console and dropped into her seat, starting the engine with the push button. Her mind was preoccupied as she crossed the Brooklyn Bridge to her father's home. "Daddy?" said Victoria, kneeling beside his upholstered swivel rocker. He turned his head slowly toward her, his expression flat. As though studying her for a long moment, he said, "Gracie?" "No, Daddy," she said, smiling. "It's Vic, your oldest daughter. I brought you something from our laboratory that might make you remember things."
"Oh, Gracie,"
he said, his voice slurred from his stroke 2 years prior.
"Put that show on where they guess what stuff costs."
The doctors told her that her father hadn't sustained any further memory loss from the incident, but Victoria believed his Alzheimer's really seemed to escalate after the stroke. She pivoted open the lid of the cooler and lifted out the box, noting how warm the exterior was. It was just about the size of a brick, but Victoria knew it was mostly insulation on the inside, along with 3 syringes for the injection sequence. Hurrying to the kitchen, she got a serrated knife and carried it back to the coffee table. She quickly cut the tape around the edges away. She then slid the knife between the lid and the box and lifted the lid. "Jesus," she muttered. She didn't have to touch it to know leaking had occurred, probably from expansion in the car's interior heat that was never intended. It had not soaked through the cardboard, but now that the box was open, she could see a slick coating on the outside of one of the syringes. It was the needle marked number 1, so she hoped it still held enough to administer the drug. Pulling a paper towel from the refrigerator, she wiped the syringe down before pulling off the needle cap with her teeth and dropping the sticky paper towel into the trash. Victoria knelt down beside her father. "Daddy, this is a special treat, and it's going to let you meet your family again." His eyes were scared, but that was normal. Brian Davis seemed frightened of everyone. In his youth he had been a middleweight boxer and was known as Doom Davis because he was nearly unstoppable. Now he was a shell of himself. Life now seemed to hold only fear and confusion for him. She extended her right arm as he sat in the easy chair and tapped on the vein a couple of times to make it more pronounced. When she was sure she was ready, she slid the needle into the vein. "Oh, no," said her father, his low objection quickly escalating to a soprano cry of fear. "It's okay, Daddy. It might sting a bit going in at first," she whispered. "Shh, now. It's going to help you." She pushed the plunger in until it bottomed out and the syringe was empty. Withdrawing it, she carried the needle back to the trash bin and dropped it inside. Once she had done so, she stared at it, realizing that wouldn't do. She leaned over the counter, tore 2 paper towels from a dispenser, and bent down to pick up the discarded syringe. Victoria put the paper towel over the needle and snapped it off. As it broke in 2, she felt something splash into her left eye, which snapped closed involuntarily. Seconds later, her eye began to twitch, like a live fly had flown right beneath her eyelid and had taken up residence there. She put the needle on the counter and hurried to the kitchen sink to flush her eyes with warm water. The flow warmed quickly, and she washed her eye, but the stinging did not subside. Turning the water off, she grabbed another 2 towels from the roll and dabbed at her eyes. The feeling that something was moving inside was no longer limited to her left eye. Now both eyes were twitching. Blinking repeatedly, she was finally able to see again, but the irritation persisted. She started to put the box in the refrigerator, but stopped, an idea striking her. She had overheard some of the conversation between Gloria, Jerry, and Marcus. Something was going on, and she would need to cover her tracks. If something serious had happened and they discovered a sample of the drug missing, they would review security video and find out it was her. It would have to be put back in place, but she was not willing to sacrifice the drug to do it. 10 minutes later, Victoria Davis had successfully transferred the drug from the trial sample syringes to 2 other ones, and she had replaced the broken needle on the 3rd cartridge with another. Luckily, her father had previously had a need for other regular injections because of anemia, and she had some extra syringes in the house. She put the 2 syringes containing the next 2 doses of the XN88 in the refrigerator. Following that, she poured olive oil into each of the 3 official drug trial syringes and used a dab of red food coloring to give their contents what she felt was the proper hue. She did her best to reseal the box, then held it up for inspection. It would pass if they were just collecting them for destruction. Now, if she could just return the container to the lab, she would be okay. Victoria took her purse from the counter and said, "Daddy, I'm going to go back to work now. The Price is Right isn't on until 2 o'clock, so you'll have to watch whatever's on before." She leaned down to kiss his cheek, and he turned to her and said, "Bye-bye, Vic." She stared at him. "Daddy?" Brian Davis smiled at her. "It's a good day," he said, reaching up to brush her cheek with his hand. As if to show her, he picked up the remote control and changed the channel himself. He hadn't done that in months. "Oh, Daddy," she said, tears running down her cheeks. He looked at her, and she searched his eyes for true recognition, and believed she saw it there. Her heart swelled. The drug was a miracle drug. It really worked. "I'll see you when I get home from work, okay? Miriam from Visiting Saints will be here at 1:30 to bring you your lunch." She squeezed his hand. "Thanks, sweetheart," he said, smiling. As he stared at her, the look of complete recognition in his eyes, something swam across them. Literally swam across. A black line, squiggly. It moved from his right eye, disappearing, then seemed to swim across his left eye. "Daddy, are your eyes okay?" "Yes, baby. Why?" "It's nothing. Well, you have a good day. I'll try to get home early." And she would. She wanted to spend time with him, just in case the change was temporary. She would give him his next injection when she got home. As she hurried to her car, fighting the urge to rub the massive twitch in her eyes, an idea struck her. She would have Jim Crane return the package to the lab. Driving back to the office was difficult. Turning the wheel, she fought the feeling of 1,000 specks of dust in her eyes, and they were watering so badly she felt the wetness on her cheeks cross her chin and make its way down to her neck, seeping into the collar of her suit jacket. She arrived at the building and parked, clutching her bag close to her as she hurried up the sidewalk toward XN Pharmaceuticals. Upon entering the building, at the employee's entrance, she spotted Jim Crane pushing a trash can on a cart, with mops and other cleaning equipment. "Jim!" she shouted, and hurried toward him. "Here's your lunchbox." She held out the small igloo. "Well, that was fast," he proclaimed, reaching out to take it. "Work okay for you?" "It was perfect," she said. "Jim, I was wondering something. I accidentally took a box from the lab early this morning, and, well, it's inside your cooler. I've misplaced my keycard, so I can't get back inside the lab. Would you be so kind as to—" "Accidentally? What'd you think it was, makeup?" he interrupted, smiling at his joke. "Something like that. At any rate, I didn't mean to take it." "I'll let you in there," he said with a shrug. "No problem." No, she said. "That's not necessary. If you're going to be around there anyway, would you mind putting it back in the second cooler from the right, on the wall where the entry door is?" "You remember which shelf it goes on?" asked Jim with a wink. "If you took it accidentally, might be good to put it back where it came from." "That's a smart idea, Jim. Second shelf from the top. It has a tag on it that says XN88, left side." "But chalking up the favors," said Jim. "I might need to collect something from you, if you know what I mean." He licked his lips. Victoria felt a shudder at the thought of the janitor touching her. "I think that can be arranged. Tell you what, do you have a cell phone?
I do, he said. It's a good one, too. My daughter taught me how to text.
He slipped a small smartphone from his pocket. Victoria took it from him and accessed the text application. She punched her cell phone number into it and gave it back to him. Well, if you take a picture of this box inside the cooler and text it to my phone, I'll text you back a nice picture of... She undid the top 3 buttons of her jacket, exposing her cleavage. This, but a bit more risque. Just between you and me. Jim's breathing increased, and his eyes were glued to her breast.
Miss Victoria, he breathed. I'll have that picture to you in less than 15 minutes.
You're a lifesaver, Jim. His eyes never left her cleavage, even as she buttoned up again.
This is a crazy day, said Jim. Be watching for that picture.
Chapter 2. Jerry and Gloria were the only board members in attendance. Marcus sat at the end of the table. "What happened to the rest of them?" asked Marcus. "Some of them are staying on top of what's happening in Middletown. The general feeling among the others is high-level stuff that we can deal with. So, what do you have for us?" asked Gloria. The conference room on the 60th floor featured 2 fully windowed walls that looked out over the city. Outside, at the moment, was a window-washing swing stage with 2 men, probably in their 50s, busily working their squeegees over the glass. Referring to a PowerPoint slideshow being projected onto a screen, Marcus said, "This film shows the reaction when the drug warms to around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. In this test sample, it was above the target temperature for approximately 22 minutes. Gloria and Jerry leaned forward. Jerry stared at the moving images for a moment before saying, "Would you pause that right there?" Marcus froze the image. "Yes?" Jerry got up and walked to the projection screen. "What is this black thing moving right here?" "Optical illusion," said Marcus. "We believe it's a variable density that gives it the appearance of what we've called worms. You can see the magnification is very high. We've never identified them with the naked eye." Gloria looked back down at her booklet and flipped to the index before thumbing to a particular page. "Here," she said, "page 142. It says that once entered into the bloodstream, the worm-like organisms increase and grow in size. Most likely because the body's around 98.6 degrees and density changes can be expected. Look, please don't run with the worm terminology. That was just a way to describe the phenomenon. As you know, there is no need to maintain temperature within the parameters once it's injected. The drug immediately interacts with the biological makeup of its host and takes on different properties. It's well documented that XN88 is designed to reach the brain and take effect within mere minutes. That's why it's administered in 3 doses, 6 hours apart. There is no time-release component here, and it was felt that too much at once would make it more detrimental than beneficial." "First of all, that's BS, Marcus," said Gloria. "Any 6-year-old knows that as liquid warms, it thins. It doesn't change density in the other direction. That kills your increased density claim right there." Before Marcus could put her in her place, she asked, "What happens when a syringe of the drug that was already compromised is injected into a test subject?" "Ah, Jesus," said Jerry. "I bet that's what happened." Marcus did not say so, but he also wondered if that was what happened in Middletown, Indiana. He looked at the others. "Much as it'll kill our stock values, we need to destroy all remaining trial samples here and discontinue this program immediately, unless we can miraculously come up with a way to—" A scratching sound came at the conference room door. Gloria looked at it, then said, "Go on, Marcus, about the plan." The scraping came again, followed by a heavy thud that shook the door. Jerry jumped to his feet. "I haven't got all fucking day, Marcus." Walking to the door and pulling it open, he turned to say something else, but was knocked backward before he got the chance to speak. As Jerry stumbled over a chair, the back of his head slammed hard into the heavy conference table. His body went limp as Victoria Davis, her feet bare and her white dress badly torn and spattered with dark red stains, lunged toward him, her fingernails slicing strips from both of his ample cheeks. The impact with the table had knocked Jerry unconscious, and he slumped into one of the swiveling armchairs and fell still. Only Victoria's brutal attack made him appear to be moving. The back of the chair lodged beneath the conference table, and she screeched and bit into his exposed throat. As her feet kicked out behind her, one of them caught the door and slammed it closed again. This all happened in a split second. Marcus leapt to his feet and backed away as he watched the once beautiful Victoria tear Jerry's throat open and begin to swallow the human meat with crazed desire. "Stop it!" screamed Gloria, but she backed away too. "Marcus, stop her! Stop her!" But despite Gloria's shrill command, Marcus stood frozen, watching his manic secretary attacking Jerry Donahue like a rabid dog. Her fingernails continued to tear at every part of his body, and as she tore away another piece of the man's flesh, Marcus could see her eyes, once a brilliant green, had turned some sort of undulating pitch black, devoid of emotion, devoid of humanity. "This is what's happening in Middletown," shouted Gloria, who scrambled to the other side of the table and stood with her back to the huge windowed wall. "Marcus, do something!" Victoria turned her attention to Jerry's face, her mouth burrowing into his fleshy cheeks, tearing them away in bloody chunks that were too large to swallow. She chewed the pieces, blood and spittle streaming from her mouth. She clawed down the side of his neck and ruptured the jugular vein, which sprayed in staccato bursts to the south wall, telling Marcus that for now, at least, Jerry's heart still pumped. The blood ran down the walls and pooled on the gleaming hardwood as Victoria crawled on top of Jerry to sink her teeth in even deeper. Marcus pressed himself against the far corner of the room. He could not get to the door without passing too close to Victoria. Marcus did not shift his eyes from the horrific scene as he sank down to the floor, putting the back of another chair between them. He believed he was now out of her view. As he began to shudder uncontrollably, he saw Gloria's lemon-yellow dress moving toward him in his peripheral vision. He looked at her and waved her away, shaking his head no. "Stay where you are," he mouthed, but would not say it aloud for fear Victoria would turn her attention to him. "Marcus!" screamed Gloria again, and this time Victoria did respond. Marcus peered around the chair and saw his secretary scramble onto the table and stand up, swaying unsteadily, her eyes impossibly black. She stared directly at the board president. "Go away, please!" shouted Gloria, now crying hysterically. Victoria took one step toward her. Marcus's brain pounded in his head as he tried to figure out how she might have come in contact with XN88 in any sort of degraded state. She didn't have access. It had to be something else. Marcus could see that Victoria Davis was aware of nothing. She was far beyond any ability to reason. Her mouth dripped gore, and her attention was wholly drawn to the shrieking Gloria. Seeing her condition, Marcus knew she was exactly the same as the people he'd seen in the news helicopter shot in Middletown. There was no doubt. Where did she come in contact with it? He thought again, racking his brain. Suddenly, Victoria gave a guttural cry and pushed off from the conference table, her arms outstretched toward Gloria as she became airborne. Her body smashed into Gloria, knocking her toward the outside glass. Victoria's arms were around the vice president's neck as they hit the glass together, the expansive window exploding outward like a bomb blast. Both women's bodies cleared the railing on the swing stage and slammed directly into the window washer on the left side, whose hands were gripping a squeegee. Unable to grasp the side of the platform, he flipped backward over the railing. The women then dropped to the extruded metal floor of the basket, with Victoria still clawing and biting at Gloria. Marcus stared in utter horror at the scene before him. The man who was catapulted over the side of the platform was still connected by a safety harness and now dangled out of Marcus's view. The once level stage tilted precariously away from the building, swinging to and fro. Clearly the weight of the man who had gone over was in excess of 200 pounds, and he was throwing the platform sharply off level. "Billy!" said the other man, looking off the back, but his eyes soon turned back to the women, who were trying to scramble to their feet. Gloria, unable to stand, rolled onto her back and kicked her feet against Victoria's chest, sending her toppling away and landing hard on her back. Gloria then grabbed the railing and pulled herself to the other side, her eyes finding Marcus. Crouching behind the other window washer, she cried, "Help me, Marcus! Get help!" Her eyes were wide and frantic. Marcus's mind spun in 1,000 directions, but after a few moments of trying to figure out what had happened to Victoria, he decided he had to try to help Gloria. He sidestepped to the end of the platform where Gloria sat clutching the railing with a death grip. Victoria was having difficulty getting back on her feet because of the wild gyrations of the scaffolding, and she growled and screamed with frustration, clearly focused on Gloria and unwilling to give up. "Gloria, you're only a couple of feet from me," he shouted. "Stand up and hold that railing, then jump back to me." "No," she screamed. "It's too far." Now Victoria got to her feet. "Then fucking move, lady," shouted the other man, his hand checking that the safety harness was still clipped to him. He shoved Gloria aside and swung a leg over the railing, his eyes on the interior of the conference room. When he pushed her, she staggered directly into Victoria's waiting arms. Marcus stared as Victoria clamped her jaws down on Gloria's neck and ripped a chunk of flesh away, creating a geyser of blood that sprayed outward, got caught by the wind, and turned into blowing sheets of crimson rain. "Oh my God," muttered Marcus, his focus on the two women. He never saw the window washer leap from the platform to the carpeted floor upon which Marcus stood. The heavy man's body impacted him hard, throwing him backward into the hardwood table behind him. A sharp pain shot through Marcus's lower back as he pushed away from the crazed worker, his eyes still on Victoria and the board president. He glanced over as the man unclipped his harness and crawled away from the massive gap in the side of the building. Marcus scooted further beneath the table and away from the window, as if he were afraid an enormous hand would reach in and yank him to his death. Now Victoria, with strength she could not have possessed before, held Gloria's limp, dead body up, feeding on her exposed neck. Marcus felt bile rise in his throat, but he could not look away. "It's too late. Whatever happened in Middletown spread like wildfire. This isn't a rural town, this is New York City." Something behind the scrambling women caught Marcus's eye. A shaking hand reached up and grabbed onto the base of the platform. The hand then jerked upward and clamped around one of the basket's uprights, pulling hard until the man's face came into view. The other window washer was doing his best to get back onto the platform. Red-faced from exertion and wincing against the effort to climb back inside the low cage, he gained another 3 inches, throwing his other arm forward and grabbing the side rail. Suddenly, Victoria slammed Gloria's body down to the floor, where her head smashed into the climber's arms, causing him to lose his grip and disappear from sight again. When he hit the bottom of his nylon safety strap, the cart jerked wildly, throwing Victoria off balance once more. Gloria no longer moved on her own. Her body only swayed back and forth with the swinging platform. His former secretary turned, and her wild eyes fell on Marcus and the other window cleaner, who was now at the door to the conference room, staring with terror in his eyes at the carnage outside. Victoria began climbing over the railing on the building side. All she had to do was fall forward, and she had a good chance of making it back into the conference room. "No goddamn way you are!" shouted Marcus, and he leaned down and grabbed a chair. It was heavy, but he didn't have far to toss it to save his life. He drew it back and flung it. To his dismay, it hit the railing and fell away. In his mind, Marcus wondered how many people stood below, unaware of the heavy furniture on its way down. Victoria cleared the rail and pushed off toward him. The leap was farther than Marcus expected, and her hand found and clutched the leg of the heavy conference table. She growled and shrieked, trying to find purchase with her other hand. "Don't let her in here!" shouted the other man. "Hit her with a goddamn chair!" Marcus didn't think. He reached down and grabbed a chair, adrenaline helping him raise it high above his head. With a wild cry, he swung it downward, slamming it atop Victoria's head. It was a direct blow, and he felt her skull give way at impact. Marcus released the chair and staggered backward. Bucking wildly, Victoria arched her back, sending the heavy chair backward through the shattered window, where it fell away. A split second later, her bloody fingers slipped from the table leg, and she went over the edge and into the abyss, strangely silent. "My God," panted Marcus. "I don't know what the hell happened." "She was batshit crazy," said the other man, also breathing hard. Marcus turned to look at him. "You okay, man?" "Just fucking barely," he said, a strong Brooklyn accent affecting his shaking voice. Marcus noticed the name tag on his uniform. Joey. "Gotta help Billy, though," he wheezed. "Give me a goddamn hand, would you?" Marcus stared at him, then at the dangling stage outside the window. It still angled sharply with the man's weight hanging from it, but it was more stable. "Hurry then," said Marcus. "What do you need me to do?" Something slammed the door behind them, and both men turned. "What the hell was that?" Marcus said, "Not sure, but we've got a problem in the building right now." "You think?" said Joey. "Come on, let's hurry. What do you need from me?" "Just reach out and hold that railing steady while I get back onto the scaffolding. Then I think we're riding it up to the roof." Marcus considered it. "Will it work with 3 of us on it?" "Don't you mean 4? asked Joey, indicating Gloria's body lying in the middle. Yes, 4. I can't imagine she's... Jesus." "Well, she is," said Joey. "Hold that, would you?" Marcus, standing against the next unbroken pane of glass, reached out and held the railing. Billy also took it, and with a large step, he swung his leg over the low ledge, then completed the jump over the rail. Stepping over Gloria's body, Joey got on his knees and reached down, managing to help Billy make his way back up and onto the platform. Billy was clearly frightened and exhausted, so 10 minutes passed before he was lying on his back beside Gloria. "Okay, now how do I get on there?" asked Marcus. "Take this," said Billy. He removed his harness and left the safety strap connected to it. In a fluid motion, he tossed it to Marcus, who strapped it on. He looked up at Billy. "Just Velcro?" "It holds. There's lots of straps. Hurry!" Sirens now sounded from the street below, and with a glance down, Marcus saw flashing lights coming into view, moving up West 50th Street. The door behind him shuddered in its frame again, and he spun around. Scraping sounds now came from behind it. He thought he heard growling, similar to the noises Victoria had made. "Here goes nothing," he said, turning back to the window. He took the step across what was now only about 18 inches of open space. The ground looked impossibly far below him. The 2 men both grabbed and lifted him almost effortlessly over the rail until he stood beside Gloria. He knew he should bend down and check her for a pulse, but he could not force himself to do so. "Going up or down?" he asked. "Up, dumbass," said Joey. "To the roof. It's where the winch is." Marcus did not begrudge the man his insult. He'd had a rough few minutes. "Fine. We'll need to get her off here, too." "We can swing the railing out once we get to the roof and clear the side of the building," panted Joey. "Billy, you sure you're all right?" "Fucking arms are sore," he said. "I was just praying that strap didn't break and my harness held. I wasn't going to try to make it back until that crazy bitch was gone. What the hell happened with her?" "She was sick," said Marcus. "Really sick." Holding the control, Billy pushed the button, and the car slowly lifted upward. Marcus counted the floors as they passed. They had 30 floors to ascend. His count had only reached 12 when he felt something bump his foot. He looked down and saw Gloria Alcala stirring. "Oh, my God," he said. "She's alive!" Marcus, still wearing the harness, knelt down beside her. To his surprise, she lifted her head and stared at his face. "Gloria, are you—" Whatever he had begun to say had died in his throat. Every part of her eyes had turned completely black, but the color was fluid, as though it were compromised of black, squirming worms. It was beyond him how she could even see. Just like Victoria, he thought. As her mouth opened, she reached out and snagged his leg with her hand and squeezed hard. Marcus jerked it away from her, but still she clung to him, her nails digging into the material of his pants, but not penetrating the skin beneath. He snatched her wrist and twisted it off his leg before scrambling away from her. Using both hands now, she tried to push herself up, her eyes moving between Marcus and the other men. She snarled and began grinding her teeth. Apparently aware of what had just occurred, Joey leaned down to help her, and Marcus yelled, "No! She's like the other—" But it was too late. As Joey took her beneath the arms, her head turned and Gloria's mouth clamped down on his bare wrist, ripping the flesh away. Joey screamed and punched her hard in the back of the head with his balled fist, then cradled his damaged wrist with his other hand. Gloria was unfazed by the powerful blow. She threw her head back and gulped down the bloody chunk of tissue as the injured man scrambled back, dropping onto his ass behind her, his feet poised to slam into her back should she make another move to turn and attack. A second later, the tissue swallowed. She got to her knees just as Marcus stepped around her to move beside Joey. Both men were now out of her direct line of sight.
"Joey, you all right?"
asked Billy, punching the controls that operated the winch high above them.
"My fucking wrist is bleeding like a sieve," he shouted. "Stay clear of her. She's as nutso as that other one was."
Now only Billy remained in front of her. Despite her battered appearance, she practically flew to her feet and charged forward toward him.
"Billy, watch out!"
shouted Joey, but it was too late. She dragged her fingernails down his face as she fell forward, closing her jaws on his substantial midsection. When she pulled away, the fabric and a good chunk of his stomach tissue came with it.
"You fucking bitch!"
he screamed, releasing the winch control. The car jerked to a stop, and he drew his fist back and slammed it into Gloria's face. The direct impact sent her flying over the platform's railing and plummeting to the street, now over 82 floors below them.
"Jesus!"
shouted Marcus Frank, leaning over to watch her body drop away.
"Are you okay?"
Gloria's limp body grew smaller and smaller, and while his instinct was to call down to the unsuspecting pedestrians below, logic told him they would never hear him. Marcus hoped that the chairs in Victoria's falling body had caused law enforcement to clear the area below them and get 100 or so first responders into the XN Pharmaceuticals building. Joey touched a hand to his stomach and winced, his fingers coming away bloody.
"I'll live, for now. Get us up there, buddy!"
shouted Joey, trying to pull himself to his feet. Billy responded, then the car jerked upward, once again rising toward the top of the building. Marcus stood, the only uninjured one of the three, and helped Joey up. As the wounded man leaned against the railing, Marcus loosened his tie and pulled it from around his neck. He said, "Here, give me your wrist." Joey looked at him, confused, then understood what Marcus was doing. He held up his wrist and Marcus wrapped the tie around it to stem the bleeding. He tied it loosely and looked up to see they were now just 6 floors from the roof.
"Ouch!"
said Marcus, as something pierced his fingers. Some of Joey's blood was on him, but there had been nothing sharp that he had seen. He wiped his finger on his pants and stared toward the roof. Chapter 3. Jim Crane used his passkey to enter the laboratory on the 44th floor of the building and pushed his janitorial card inside. He had removed the box Victoria had given him from the cooler, and now had it tucked inside the wringer on his mop bucket as he entered the lab. It would sure be nice to see what Victoria Davis had to show him, but losing his job over it would piss Helen off to no end. Once inside the lab, he let the door click closed before checking to be sure he was alone. He wasn't really inside the actual lab, just the storage area for the drugs. The security guard outside hadn't given him a second look, so Jim was confident. He identified the second cooler from the right, and even saw the open space through the thick glass. Leaning down, he lifted up the white cardboard box from the wringer and held it up. The sealing tape looked wrong. It wasn't completely lined up where he could see the original tape had been. He began to peel it off to realign it, but stopped.
"Not your problem, Jim," he said. "Just get it done."
But aside from that, there were thin black lines on the cardboard that looked wet. When he ran his thumb over one of them, he felt a pinch.
"Ouch!"
he said, looking at his thumb. The box was now smeared with the black. Jim could see nothing that might have caused the poke to his thumb, but he stepped forward and opened the front of the cooler and slid the box onto the shelf. Just to be thorough, he then pulled the mop from the bucket and swiped it over the floor in front of him 2 or 3 times. That done, he dropped the mop back into the bucket and rolled the cart back to the door. He swiped his card and heard the click. When he entered the hallway, the guard looked up. He was a thin black man with a bored look on his face, but he was pleasant enough. "That was quick," he said. "I'd be careful in there, though. Might be having you mop up some biological waste."
"Oh, I do that too," said Jim. "But they made me put on a suit first, so I'm okay."
"Right on, man," said the guard, whose name was Jared Washington. "Hit me." He held out his palm. Jim was confused for a second, then remembered what the gesture called for. He slapped the man's hand.
"See you next time," he said.
"Yeah, you got it," said Jared, inspecting his hand and rubbing his thumb and forefinger together.
"Man, you got something sticky on your fingers there. Better use some of that cleaning shit on it."
He was smiling, but continued staring at his hand. He scratched his eye, then lowered it again and stood up.
"Man, my hand kind of stings. What'd you get on me?"
Jim shrugged.
"Not sure, but it'll wash off."
He turned away and rolled the cart to the service elevator, where he pushed the call button. Since he was the only janitor on duty today, the elevator should have still been on the floor where he'd left it, but as he checked the lights above the doors, he saw it was all the way on the first floor.
"They know they ain't supposed to use this elevator," he barked. "Fucking suits."
His right eye began to twitch. Jim blinked several times, coating it with water. A tear ran down his cheek, and when it hit the floor, it looked like black ink. He stared at it.
"The hell?"
he said aloud. Glancing up at the lights again, he saw the car was again rising. 22nd, 23rd, 24th, all the way up to the 43rd. When the light for the 44th floor lit up, he put his hands on the back of the supply cart and prepared to push inside. But the lights kept flitting by, 45th, 46th, and up it went. Shaking his head, Jim pushed the cart against the wall, away from the elevator, and headed for the regular passenger elevator. Outside were 5 people, all of them looking scared. He walked up, and they all backstepped away from him, their faces pale.
"Hold on now," he said. "It's just me. Service elevator's gone nuts."
A man he didn't know, with short-cropped brown hair and wide eyes, probably in his late 20s, stared at him and said, "That's because we're getting the hell out of this building. People are going crazy, attacking. They said Marcus Frank's secretary flew out of the 60th floor conference room window."
Jim's heart sank. "Victoria Davis? Bullshit," said Crane. "Them windows don't open, and I was talking to her just before lunchtime."
"It just happened a few minutes ago. She went nuts and smashed into it," the man said. "Go outside and see for yourself. We're all getting out of here." A wave of dizziness came over Jim. He steadied himself against the wall, and a woman in the mix said, "Are you all right?" Jim looked at her, and she screamed.
"What the fuck?"
said Jim.
Your eye's all black," she cried.
The man then pushed everyone away from Jim.
"Stay away from us. You got whatever's getting to those people."
"The hell I do. I'm fine,"
said Jim. But now he couldn't see anything out of his right eye, and his left was beginning to twinge. The elevator car opened.
"Next car,"
a man pressed against the crowd inside said.
"We're full."
"Fuck you," said Jim, barreling into the car. Everybody erupted into screams, and fists began flying in all directions. The others who had been waiting in the hallway joined in, trying to push inside the overstuffed car. A scream rose from the back of the car, and as if someone turned on a spigot, blood sprayed into the air. It had to be an arterial spurt, thought Jim, like the ones he'd seen on that Grey's Anatomy show or Nurse Jackie. The blackness continued to swirl around him. The doors bounced off him, then returned to the open position. As he tried to get his bearings, a fist smashed into his right cheek, and he fell to the floor, his head inside the elevator, exposed ankles all around him. An impulse took him. It told him to feed. As if a grill had been fired, the smell of the flesh all around him became as irresistible as barbecued baby back ribs, prime rib or top sirloin. Jim stretched open his mouth, other legs still jostling him but no longer of any concern. He sank his teeth into the leg nearest him. As the taste of warm blood spilled into his mouth, he became ravenous. The last thing Jim Crane remembered was the sweet taste of bloody meat washing down his throat. Gladys Rutherford left her husband at the kitchen table eating his applesauce. She would go next door to check on Brian Davis, as she had so long ago promised his daughter, Victoria, that she would. She had been watching for the woman from Visiting Saints, but she had never come. That was exactly why she looked out for her neighbors. People were unreliable nowadays. Before his Alzheimer's took away his mind, she and her husband Clyde had played pinochle with Brian every Friday night. They would have other friends over, but if nobody was available, Brian was always willing to join them for game night. She gave a courtesy knock before opening the door, stepping in. "Bry?" she called. Gladys did not expect an answer. It was her typical routine to announce herself before walking into the living room where he would be sitting in his recliner. Sometimes he knew her, and sometimes he didn't. She hoped he was having a good day today. When she rounded the corner, she was taken aback. The chair was empty. Looking around, she called, "Brian?" A thump came from behind her. She turned to see him emerging from the hallway, no cane in hand, not holding onto the walls. "Oh, my!" she exclaimed. "Bry, look at you, walking without help." Her neighbor stopped and stood there, silent, his eyes on her. She smiled at him, but when he raised his eyes to her, she could only see his large, dilated pupils. No whites of his eyes. It made Brian look strange, and it worried Gladys. His mouth was open, and he let out a moan. Only it didn't quite sound like a moan. It was more like a throaty growl. He fell forward, and Gladys hurried toward him, sure he was about to fall. Miraculously, Brian jerked his leg out in front of him and staggered forward unsteadily. "Brian, let me help you," Gladys said, taking him by the left arm. With another snarl, he opened his mouth and pushed his face toward hers, his hands clawing at her. She pulled her face away and instinctively pushed at him, shouting, "Brian, stop that!" But Brian Davis didn't stop that. He suddenly had more strength than Gladys had ever known him to have before. He turned and grabbed her from the back of the head and yanked her forward. She felt something in her neck snap, and in the next moment a searing pain tore at her right cheek. Forcing her eyes open, she saw Brian's face against hers, his false teeth ripping at her flesh. As she pulled back, her eyes focused on him. From his gnashing mouth hung a flap of flesh that she knew had been torn from her face. Her screams echoing through the house like they came from someone else, Gladys suddenly felt dizzy. She lost her balance and started to fall sideways. Brian rode her all the way down, moving in to bite her again as they dropped together. His ragged fingernails tore at her flesh as she hit the floor, her head smacking into the base of a table. Now stars swirled through her vision, and she found she had no more energy to fight. Her eyes fell on the open door to the house. She had left it that way. Gladys stared at the entry and thought two things. The first was a hope that with the door open someone might come in and save her before she died of her injuries. Her other thought was selfless, the way she had lived most of her life. What would become of poor Brian if he were to wander outside and become lost in the city? It would be her fault. Gladys Rutherford no longer felt any pain, as a blanket of darkness enveloped her, and a new hunger began to take hold. 2 floors from the roof of the building, Billy dropped the control button and stooped down, holding his head and moaning. The platform bumped to a halt. A couple of floors before, Joey had also dropped into a sitting position, apparently in agony too. Marcus didn't bother asking either of them what was wrong. He stepped around Billy and grabbed the controller, pushing the green up button. The car jerked to a start and rose 2 additional floors to the roof, where the car hit a lever, triggering the power and securing the car to the roof with pivoting clamps. In seconds, Marcus figured out the railing had to be lifted up to swing it out. He did so. As he turned to offer Billy assistance, the man fell toward him, his arms outstretched, his mouth wide open as though preparing to bite him. "What the fuck?" he screamed, leaping backward onto the roof, away from the man. He looked at Joey, who was also getting to his feet. Neither focused on one another. They were staring at Marcus with black, undulating eyes, just like Victoria's had been, and Gloria's. This had to have been caused by the XN-88. Marcus Frank racked his brain, trying to figure out what could have gone wrong. He was told there were inert live cultures in the drug's compound, but he was never told what would happen if they became active, or that they would become active in temperatures above the high limit. Billy and Joey, seemingly at the same exact moment, charged off the platform toward him. Marcus didn't think. He turned and ran toward the aluminum door leading to the stairwell. Reaching in seconds, he yanked it open and charged down the extruded metal steps, his footfalls clanging loudly as he descended them 2 at a time. When he reached the first landing, he swiped his card and yanked the door open. It was madness there. People he knew and others he didn't were frantic. Some screamed and did their best to escape others, who seemed to be attacking people at random. Blood was everywhere, smeared on the walls, the floors, and over the scrambling people themselves. Several blood-soaked people turned toward him, and seeing the door open, they charged forward. Marcus jerked the door closed and turned to run again, this time with his hand on the rail as he practically leapt down an entire half-flight at a time. He decided he would stay in the stairwell as long as he could, or until he couldn't run any farther. His lungs burning and dizziness beginning to overtake him, Marcus believed he had gone down at least 12 stories. But as he reached the next landing, he saw the number 81 on the door. Only 9 floors. He was exhausted and growing weaker with every turn. He pressed on, now unable to muster more than a fast walk down the steps. A clanging sound came from below him, and he slowed even more. As Marcus rounded the next flight of stairs, he saw the door was open, and people as bloodied as though above him now flooded into the stairwell. They weren't just going down now. Some were mounting the steps and coming toward him. 6 or 7 people, blood on their faces and chins, their clothing mottled with gore, saw him. They charged with new fervor. Marcus turned and ran back up the steps, every muscle in his legs now burning. He yanked the door open on the 81st floor and saw the same madness as before. This time, he didn't have a chance to yank the door shut. People were too close. He turned and ran up again. None of the doors above him had been opened yet, and he was able to push himself back up to the roof. The door had closed, and there was no sign of Billy or Joey. As he burst through the roof access door, he charged straight toward the swing stage and quickly swung the railing closed, grabbing the controller. He pressed the down button, and the car began to lower, far too slowly for his taste. He heard something just above him, and he looked up to see Billy and Joey staring down, teetering on the edge of the roof. Marcus turned to look at the street below him, when a double impact slammed the descending platform. Billy's body hit the edge of the railing, seeming to bend it in half, and flipped over, plummeting down into the abyss below him. Joey landed squarely on his back beside Marcus, his black eyes staring upward, and finally turned his head toward him. His teeth worked against one another, gnashing. "Jesus!" shouted Marcus, jamming his finger on the down button harder, but the platform would not move any faster. Joey was now pushing his broken body up, his hands clutching the rail, but Marcus could not figure out how he could manage it in his damaged condition. Now on his knees, his voice a strange, garbled growl, Joey fell toward Marcus. Without releasing the controller, he kicked Joey in the face, his nose erupting in a bloody spray, as the impact knocked him onto his back again. "Come on! Come on! Come on!" shouted Marcus. But now his head began swirling. It felt like the entire cart spun. He blinked to clear his vision, but it was growing cloudier. Legs buckling. Marcus allowed them to fold beneath him. He could no longer see, but he knew he could not release the button. He had to make it to the ground floor. His vision swirled in and out, but he recognized the shattered window of his conference room as the car slowly lowered. There were people there. Lots of people. Before the car was level with the room's floor, they began leaping from the window. 10, 12 people, some of them striking the railing and falling away, others making it over and falling beside him. Marcus felt teeth clamp down on his arm, and he tried to force himself to fight, but there was nothing in him. 2, 3 more bodies landed on the platform, and Marcus focused only on pressing the down button. "The ground is safety. Get to the sidewalk." Marcus Frank managed to turn his eyes upward, seeing through the pile of bodies atop him that 4 more people had jumped. He watched them fall toward him as though in a dream, and when they hit, he heard something snap. Instantly, Marcus felt himself sliding down the steel floor, the controller ripped from his desperate fingers. He was in free fall. Soon, traveling at close to 100 miles per hour, Marcus Frank's body slammed into the New York sidewalk below. As his body exploded, his tainted blood spattered dozens of feet in all directions, caught by the wind blowing up West 50th Street. As his blood ran into the cracks of the walkway, it blended with that of Gloria, Jerry, and Victoria. The microscopic black worms wriggled along the streams of blood, leaking into the gutters and beyond, making their way to other parts of Gotham. Below the city, a sewer rat stood on its hind legs, staring upward. A reddish-brown trickle of liquid rained down from above, dropping squarely on its head. It licked. Then it licked again. It wanted more. Middletown, Indiana, was only the beginning. This has been Middletown II, The Mean Streets Just Got Meaner. Written by Eric A. Shelman and narrated by the author. Copyright 2017 by Eric A. Shelman. Production copyright 2024 by Eric A. Shelman.